Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to my November 2020 Planetarium show. This is set up to show us the night sky as it would be during November. Specifically, it's set for the 1st of November, but the only real difference will be the position of the moon from night to night. The rest of the objects will be much as described. So we're at the early afternoon, and we're going to move on till 5 o'clock in the evening when the sunset really begins to bring the sky to its orange colour. There's a couple of bright objects immediately visible in the south, and those are the giant planets Jupiter and Saturn. We'll go and look at Jupiter first. Once we zoom into about this level, we're seeing Jupiter as it would appear with a 6-inch or 8-inch telescope. And this is a typical sort of view that an amateur would get. We can see the disk of the planet, and we can see laid out 2 on each side the 4 main Galilean moons discovered by Galileo. If we had a more powerful instrument, we can zoom in and get a much larger view of the disk of the planet here, showing real detail in the cloud belts, the 2 main belts just north and south of the equator there, and the polar regions, and lots of little storms and bubbles going on there. And those blue regions are called barges. We'll pull back away from Jupiter though and go and have a look at some of its moons. The 4 big ones begin with the innermost Io, and this is the color of a pizza. It's actually caused by sulfur. This is the most volcanic world in the solar system. Every one of those black regions is an active volcano on Io, spewing sulfur all over the surface. Moving on out, a rather contrasting little world, Europa, the 2nd moon from Jupiter, about the same size as Io, and these 2 are both about the same size as our own moon. Europa is covered in ice though, with 1 or 2 cracks and grooves running through it there. And those are bringing dirty material up from an ocean of water that lies underneath the ice. And it's a possible habitat there for some form of alien life form. Just to the left of Jupiter, we find the next moon, Ganymede, and this is the largest moon in the solar system, bigger even than the planet Mercury. If it orbited the Sun, we would call it a planet. But it orbits Jupiter, so we call it a moon. Glaciers and a few craters on the surface there, and again this might also have a watery, salty ocean underneath that icy crust in which alien creatures could be living right now. The 4th moon from Jupiter is the dark moon Callisto, covered in craters and a much older, less geologically active surface. Again, this is almost the same size as the planet Mercury, so quite substantial objects in their own right. Jupiter, of course, has many other moons, at least 79 at the last count, and that number seems to go up all the time. Now we can see Jupiter and Saturn bright in the sky there, and the Milky Way diving down to the horizon to the right. Let's zoom in on Saturn, and the first thing you'll of course see with Saturn is its rings. As soon as we get reasonable magnification, we see the disk of the planet and the rings around it. We can also see some of the moons. They're labelled up for you there with Titan to the right, Dione, Rhea, Tethys, and the smaller moons Enceladus and Hyperion. If we zoom in a bit further, we can get a bit more detail visible on the main planet itself. You'll see the pastel shades of the cloud tops there, and also the detail in the rings, with the main A and B rings divided by that dark gap, the Cassini division, and then the thinner gap in the outer ring there, the Encke division. We'll just pan across now and have a little look at Titan, another large moon. This is about the same size as the planet Mercury as well, and has its own atmosphere, thicker even than that of the Earth, and full of this orange organic smog. Very, very interesting chemistry going on in the atmosphere of Titan, producing all sorts of organic molecules. but at very low temperatures. This far from the sun, it's only minus 160 degrees centigrade. So we'll pull back from Saturn and Jupiter there and move across to find the real star of the show for this month. And that will be best placed at about 7 o'clock. So we'll just let time run forward by an hour until we get there. We'll see one or two satellites moving across the screen. The software that I'm using to generate this knows all about the positions of many satellites, including the International Space Station, which we might just catch a glimpse of later on. But here's the main star of the show. We have the constellation Pisces, the fish, one of the constellations of the zodiac. Those are supposed to be the heads of the fish and their tails tied together with seaweed. You'll see that in the artwork when I bring that onto the screen. Here we are. That's what that's supposed to look like. But there's a very, very bright and orangey red looking object lurking there in the constellation of Pisces. And that, of course, is the planet Mars. Mars is perfectly positioned for observing at the moment. The Earth has just overtaken it on the inside of our orbit, and that puts us very, very close in terms of distance, which makes Mars look larger. So as we zoom in on Mars, we start to see the beginnings of detail, and then we'll see there Mars's moons Phobos and Deimos, plus the desert markings of Syrtis Major. Looks like an upside down rendering of of Africa there on the surface, the highland regions of Syrtis Major. If we zoom in even further on Mars, you'll see that there's a lot more detail going on. A number of impact craters, a giant volcano there with its the bright region, and a little tiny polar cap at the bottom there. It's summer down there on that side of Mars at the moment, so the polar cap is highly shrunken. We can't see the opposite cap, it's tipped over the horizon there. We'll pull back away from Mars though, go to the wide view, and we'll see what other constellations we can find. So this is the constellation of Pegasus, the winged horse, and we have the great square of Pegasus to the left there, a very prominent feature in this night sky at this time. And you can see the stick diagram. Pegasus is upside down, of course. Lots of things in astronomy tend to be upside down. Just above Pisces and Aquarius. So that's the constellation of Pegasus. And it contains some very interesting galaxies that we can go and look at. This one is NGC 7331. There's the main spiral galaxy there, but you can also see in the image one or two smaller galaxies. This is the Hubble Space Telescope view that we've replaced in the software. And down to the right, there's another little cluster of galaxies called Stephan's Quintet, 340 million light years away. So the light that was captured by the camera there set off before the dinosaurs were even born. Now we'll go to the left of Pegasus and the constellation of Andromeda. Very well placed for observations at this time of year. It shares a corner star there with this great square of Pegasus and lives just above the top of Pisces. There we have Andromeda, the maiden, laid out along the stick diagram. That's what it's supposed to look like. But of course, there's a very famous object, and you can already see it, and that's the Andromeda Galaxy. We live in a galaxy called the Milky Way. Our neighboring galaxy is this. About 1 trillion stars, all orbiting round their common center of mass, with a supermassive black hole right at the center that we can't see, obscured by billions of stars blocking our line of sight. Here's the Hubble image to show you. You can see the dark dust lanes around the spiral arms, and then the bright object in the center there, that's a small companion galaxy, Messier object number 32. These small dwarf galaxies orbit around the main Andromeda Galaxy. And we have a few. We have the large and small Magellanic Clouds that are dwarf galaxies that orbit around the Milky Way. This is another slightly larger companion dwarf galaxy. And the entire group of Andromeda and its dwarf galaxies are all moving towards the Milky Way at 163 kilometers per second. And in about 5 billion years' time, Andromeda and the Milky Way will merge to form one large supergalaxy. Also getting in on the act will be the third member of our galactic neighborhood, and that's the Triangulum Galaxy here, just down in the small constellation below Andromeda. Much more face on, we see the spiral structure in the spiral arms there, but it's about 1/10 the size of either Andromeda or the Milky Way, but it too will merge with them both and become part of a supergalaxy in 5,000 million years' time. 10 times further away, we have the Outer Limits Galaxy. This is very much an edge-on view of a spiral galaxy, so much so that it looks like two fried eggs back to back. You can see the bulge of the nucleus where the yolks would be, and where the white would be are the spiral arms, with that dirty dust lane carving its way across the middle. So we'll pull back away from Andromeda there. Still see the Andromeda Galaxy, that's visible to the naked eye. But just down here, we have the planet Uranus. Very much a parade of planets going on at the moment, all lined up nicely across the sky. Here's the greenish white disk of Uranus and its moons, Oberon, Umbriel, Ariel, Miranda, Titania, the 5 big ones, and then some smaller ones, Puck and Juliet marked there. Also has its own system of rings. They're not visible to us here from Earth. They were discovered by the Voyager 2 spacecraft, which is the only spacecraft to have visited this part of the solar system and took a flyby of Uranus back in the 1980s. A few features on the surface there, some cloud belts, but very much a pale greenish colour caused by methane high in the atmosphere of the planet. So that was Uranus. We're now going to take a little bit of a look at our nearest neighbour, and that's the Moon. And the Moon is just on the cusp of being full on the 1st of November, and again right at the end of November it will be full again. So it'll go through its full collection of phases. Here we see it with the mare, the dark seas, these round impact basins where the Moon was struck early in its life by large incoming space rocks, puncturing holes in the surface and letting lava flood out from the molten interior. And the Moon is sat in the constellation of Taurus at the moment. But over here we have an object that you won't have seen, I'm sure. This is the largest of the asteroids, number 1 Ceres. It's just 950 kilometers across and too small to show as anything other than a point of light with amateur telescopes. But we now have some fabulous views of this little world that orbits between Mars and Jupiter, because we have the Dawn spacecraft in orbit around Ceres at the moment. It's been there for some years, taking the most fantastic detailed views of the surface of this intriguing little world. Unlike some of the moons of Jupiter, it looks likely that this is an ice crust covering a liquid water ocean underneath. You can see it's been peppered with craters, but they're all rather soft looking. That's because of the slightly slushy nature of the ice on the surface there. So a fascinating world. Moving on then from Ceres, the largest of the asteroids, we'll actually run the clock forward to 9 o'clock now. So we'll start to see a few moving satellites again, and the stars will start to rotate slightly. Here we go. This is time moving at much greater than normal speed. And we'll pan across to the face of Taurus the Bull. That V shape on its side with the bright orange star, Aldebaran, marking the eye of Taurus the bull. It's got enormous horns out to the left there. There you can see the artwork. And of course the moon is sat in the constellation of Taurus, as we saw. We'll take the artwork away. We can see the face of Taurus the bull is made up of that V-shaped star cluster with the red giant star Aldebaran. Aldebaran is actually much nearer to us than the rest of the stars. And on the bull's back we have the Seven Sisters, or the Pleiades star cluster. This is a young star cluster 440 light years away from us, containing about 9 or 10 very bright, hot, young blue stars, and then hundreds of slightly fainter white stars, and an even larger number of yellower and orange and even red dwarf stars, all born out of the same cloud of gas and dust something like 500 million years ago. But if we go to the top corner of one of the horns of Taurus the bull, we find the opposite end of stellar evolution. This is the Crab Nebula, a supernova remnant that where the star in the middle blew up and was observed by the Chinese in the year 1054 as a bright new star in the sky. When we look back, we now see the expanding shockwave of gas there called the Crab Nebula. Now back over towards the south in the constellation of Aquarius, the water carrier, marked out by this stick diagram here, just to the west of Pisces, and quite well placed. We have the last planet on the tour for this evening. There's the water carrier. You can see that one of the fish of Pisces and the upside down head of Pegasus. So all in the same region of the sky, well placed and high in the south, so it's good for observation. So we'll drill down into the center of the constellation of Aquarius and reveal the planet Neptune. There it is, faint blue dot, very difficult to observe unless you're an expert or have a really good star map. But if you do, you can find it, and you will see a pale blue star-like object that isn't quite a point of light. It does show a small disk. With this software we can zoom in much greater extent and see the whole planet as it would look from a flyby, as was done by Voyager 2 again back in the 1980s. So that's the blue disk of the ice giant planet Neptune, and it has one large moon and several smaller ones. The large moon off to the right there is Triton, and fascinating world in its own right. It almost looks like it's a possible twin of the dwarf planet Pluto, and it may be that they share a common origin. But when we looked at the photographs from the Voyager flyby, Triton seemed to be covered in pink snow and have black markings on it that you can see there, which are active geysers where liquid nitrogen is being belched out from the subsurface and carrying dirty organic material downwind in the thin atmosphere of the little moon, which was quite a surprise for an object so far from the sun to have that much heat that that sort of activity could still carry on. Now I'm afraid we've run out of time, so I've just panned upwards. Again, we're looking at the square of Pegasus right in the center. The Andromeda Galaxy is visible just upper left there, and also the Triangulum Galaxy. But what we're going to do is let time run forwards and spin the sky round until we begin to see the orange glow there coming up from the left, and that is of course the rising sun as we approach dawn. You still see the planet Mars there shining very brightly, got to be the star of the show at the moment. But gradually all of this part of the sky is heading down towards the horizon and setting over here in the west as we finally approach 6:45 in the morning and the end of the show. So I hope you've enjoyed that. The software that I use to generate these shows is called Stellarium. You can download it for free. It runs on all common platforms, including your phones. and is an absolutely marvellous tool for understanding the night sky. So do check out my other planetarium shows for other times of the year, and also my other videos here on YouTube. There's some links on the screen now, and you should be able to enjoy many different aspects of astronomy by having a look at some of those. So I do recommend you try that out. Thank you very much.